Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's an honor to be with you again this week as we continue in the book of Isaiah. This is a hard one this week, Isaiah 14:12 through 21. It's hard for a lot of different reasons. One being that what we're going to talk about today, there are certain attitudes and interpretations, especially on this first 4 verses we're going to talk about today. Excuse me, but we're going to talk about it anyway. I encourage you to do your own research, to do your own studying, to be Bereans and get after the scripture like we do here, and see what you find. There's a lot of different ideas and a lot of different theologians who have opinions, and so I encourage you to get into it and do, like I said, buy your own. There are commentaries out there that aren't real expensive. I would encourage you to get those and do your own studying, do your own research. So we're also, again, going to tie things back to what's going on today. So it's going to seem political. I don't mean it to be political, but it's to show us how behaviors repeat, and hopefully we can learn from history and not make those same mistakes. So with that, we begin in, let me get my music stance sorted out here. We begin in verses 12 through 15 today. How you are fallen from heavy, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Now, a lot of you are going to recognize this passage and are going to tie it to the fall of Satan. And a lot of people do. However, and during doing the research and reading up on things this week, that does not seem to be the case. In the previous passage before this, the passage we talked about last week, Isaiah is talking about the fall of Babylon. Why would he all of a sudden shift gears and start talking about the fall of Satan? It doesn't logically make sense, at least not to me. So I believe that this is a continuation of what he was talking about last week. He's still talking about Babylon. And the great, and I believe that because of a lot of people, because initially it didn't make sense to me that he would jump like that, okay? And the great expositors, especially around the Reformation, are pretty unanimous that this is not about the fall of Satan. Now, maybe Isaiah made the tie-in, or maybe he was thinking about that as he wrote this, but there are a lot of ties back to mythology and what was going on at the time, and Baal and Baal's replacement, and all these mythological stories that I'm not going to get into. It would take too long. But again, you can go read up on that stuff as well. But there seems to be a lot of tie-in to that more so than to the fall of Satan. And again, some similarities, but basically Isaiah is saying, King of Babylon, you are striving to be God. And as a result, your fall is going to be great. Right? Because in this passage, the challenge is obviously human because of the last verse. You are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. That's a place for the dead. We know from the story that Jesus told of Lazarus and the rich man. They both die and they're in Sheol. And there's this conversation that happens. And so he's obviously talking about this human challenge, this challenge to God, the Creator, from the creation. And the issue is God going to be held in esteem as he deserves? Or will man insist on seeing himself as God is, seeing himself in that position, seeing himself as the ruler of his own life, being able to do whatever he decides he wants to do. That's the battle here. The king of Babylon probably saw himself as a bright morning star. You think about his conquering the nations, him coming into a town, and all the attention would be on him, right? His notoriety was as a bright comet in the sky. But that came to a crashing halt when Darius and the Medes put an end to the Babylonian Empire in 539 BC. For as long as it took to build that empire, it came crashing down rather quickly. And in spite of his opinion of himself, and probably because of them, the king dies. And just like everybody else, he's in Sheol. Just like everybody else. I keep saying death is the great equalizer. And so the king of Babylon dies. In fact, we have the story of Nebuchadnezzar kind of losing his mind and going off feeding on the grass of the fields for a while before he comes back to his right mind. And then I think it's Belshazzar is the one that is conquered by the Medes, if I have my history right. But he is brought down to an even playing field with everybody else upon his death. And all his claims to be God are mocked upon his death. If he's God, why is he dead? It's like all those people who profess one thing or make these predictions, and then all of a sudden they don't happen. And now they are mocked for not knowing what they're talking about. And so for all of Babylon's greatness and for all of the nations that they have conquered, to what end? Because now the whole empire is gone. So as with anybody who thinks or strives to be God, they are in some way or another quickly reminded that they are mortal and fall way short of that throne. Right? But this was the temptation in the garden. If you go back to Genesis 3, what does Satan say to Eve? Talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He says to Eve in chapter 3, verse 5, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." That was the temptation, and that was the enticing thing to Eve. It looked good to eat, and all this knowledge is supposedly wrapped up in this piece of fruit, whatever it is. We always think it's an apple, but the Bible doesn't say what it is. But that's the temptation. That's the lure, to be like God. What happens? It brings sin. It's disobedience. It brings death, not a throne. That's what it brought to Adam and Eve. It brought banishment from the garden. It brought toil in the ground. It brought pain in giving birth, and eventually brought death. There was no throne. There was no, God-like existence for them. In fact, it was just the opposite. In Job 20, verses 6 and 7, it says, though his might mount up to the heavens, and his head reach to the clouds, he will perish forever like his own dung. Those who have seen him will say, where is he? Same thing here. Doesn't matter how great a leader you are. The answer to that question, where is he? He's dead. That's where he is. He's dead, awaiting the return of Christ, just like everybody else. So, continuing on in 16 through 21. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble? Who shook kingdoms? Who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities? Who did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out, away from your grave, like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain. Those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. The scene shifts now. It shifts now to a king not in glory, not seated on a throne, but in disgrace, unburied, left for people to pass by and look on a rotting corpse. And they say to themselves, is this the guy? How did this guy fall and come to this state? How does that happen to a king so great that has conquered all these nations? How does that happen? Because in Israel, to leave a body unburied, that was a disgrace. Remember the story when Saul and his son Jonathan are killed. And they are beheaded and they are hung on the gates. What happens? The men of Gilead, in respect, go and take the bodies down and retrieve them and bury them. So those who pass by marvel at the reversal of fortunes of this king. Right? We see politicians all the time, at least in this country, and others, they lie in state, right? They die and they lie in state. Sometimes it's an open casket, but a lot of times it's just a flag-draped casket laying in the rotunda of the Capitol, and people come and pass by. And it doesn't matter how mighty they were. It doesn't matter how powerful they were. They're not mighty and powerful anymore. They're dead. And that is what awaits the king here. It's the same thing. People who make the earth and God's creation its victims of their whims and follies and desires, eventually they all discover they all suffer the same fate. All the tyrants that have come before. I think we talked about this last week. Stalin, Marx, Hitler, Pol Pot, on and on and on. They're all dead. They're all awaiting judgment, just like we are. Because the nations of the world belong to God. He chooses who will rule over them. And he does so in his will for his purposes. And a lot of people just seek control. With the information age now that we live in, we get a lot of information about what's happening in governments around the world. And you see that people just want control. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and she asked me, it's like, why do people like that? Or not even politicians. It could be just rich people. Guys like Bill Gates, for example. And the treacherous things that he comes up with. Why do they want control? Why do they want it all for themselves? Because they do. They just do. People who love power and control would rather have the nations as a desert under their control rather than a paradise under somebody else's. That's how prideful they are. That's how prideful they are. They do not want anything happening that goes opposite of what they think or believe. And sometimes it's for control, for power, or it's just because out of hatred and disagreement. There was a thing in Seattle this week. There was a Christian rally, and Antifa and BLM show up, and they're trying to prevent people from going, and they start getting violent, and there are arrests. I saw a video of a couple with young children, very young children, maybe 6 years old and under, 3 of them. And they were surrounded by these Antifa activists and prevented from getting into the rally, where the cops had to come and escort this couple away. Why? Excuse me, why? Because you disagree with Christianity, so you're going to block people from going and you're going to get violent? It just boggles my mind, kind of. But again, it's the same thing, right? It's about power. It's about shutting things down that go against what others believe. So whether it's a Babylonian king conquering nations or organizations that try to shut down things that go against what they believe, it's the same thing. Well, Henry, how is that the same thing? Because it's pride, right? The desire to destroy or oppress is a source of pride, and it is perversion in its simplest form. That's what it is. That's what it has in common. It's just pride. I think I know better. So I'm going to shut that down because they're idiots or because they're whatever I think of them. That's pride. That's all it is. And so the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Same root of abhorrent behavior. And people who fall into this category that Isaiah is talking about, it's spiritual exile. That's what they're in spiritual exile. You can't be a believer in God and behave that way. Well, you can. I guess you can. But then you're not a true follower of Christ if that's how you behave. And again, there are times to turn the tables over. I understand that. But when you do those types of things, or, and deny God, that is spiritual exile, right? Because when pride denies what God has given, the life God has given, the gifts God has given, or denies God himself, right? Ultimately then, what gets denied is life itself. Because not submitting to God and not accepting Christ means what? Ultimately, death. That's the bottom line. So, we expect justice. There's a lot of, for those who are fans of the current administration, there's a lot of angst over the fact that things aren't moving fast enough, for whatever that means. There's a lot of talk on social media and stuff about things like that. And from a Babylon perspective, in this type of situation, we expect judgment for what he's done to other nations. Coming in and conquering them, enslaving them, starving them, taking their crops, whatever it may be. But we expect God to mete out justice. And he will, but not for what we think it's going to be. He's going to be judged, Isaiah says, for the damage he's done to his own kingdom and to his own people. See, because this is how pride works. The pride that fuels tyrants results in damage done to his own land and his own people. And I wish I could remember what the name of the city in Ukraine was. It begins with, is it Holodomor? It's something like that. But go look at it. I had no idea until I saw a movie about it, where Russia starved Ukraine out, seized all their crops, and I don't know how many tens of thousands died in Ukraine back in the days of Stalin. This is what they do. This is what tyrants do. They just take. And we are warned about that by Samuel when Israel asks for a king. God warns us, you want a worldly king, this is what you're going to get. And so the damage that the ruler of Babylon has done to his own people is going to be the reason why he is judged. Because leaders are to be caretakers of their people. They're supposed to look after them and care for them and make sure that they are provided for. But when they exploit the land and the people, then God is going to hold them accountable. And this is not restricted to tyrants. Anybody who does anything like I just talked about from a point of pride, they're the same thing. They may not be destroying nations, but you're behaving poorly to those immediately around you. That's what's happening. when you start to oppress people, it doesn't matter whether it's on a national basis or on a local basis. When you start trying to oppress people, God's going to deal with you. And what God does then in his righteous judgment is to remove the name of those who act in this way. And that's what Isaiah asks for. Right? Tyrants desire to have their kids carry on their legacy and build upon that legacy. And Isaiah says, no, don't. Just erase them. Just erase them from the face of the earth so that no one even remembers them. And that's how pride ends. You have story after story of prideful behavior in the Bible. How does it end? Usually not well. You either repent and convert, or it ends quite badly. And so those who strive to leave their mark on the world through violence and force will see their memory and everything they did erased from the world. Now, we remember their names of the most notorious, but the things they have done, hopefully, have been righted, and those things are no longer continuing. But those who seek humility, as the Bible tells us we should, those who become servants of Christ, those who submit to the will of God, those are the names that are written and spoken of in high esteem in the annals of history.